The last time I saw Daniel Wright smile, he was standing in a courtroom watching everything he had stolen crumble around him. His expensive lawyer sat beside him, looking defeated. The investors who had once celebrated him as a visionary were seated in the gallery, their faces twisted with anger and embarrassment. And I was standing at the plaintiff's table watching the man who had been my best friend for 15 years finally face the consequences of what he had done to me. But before I tell you about that day, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because if you're going to understand why I did what I did, if you're going to understand how betrayal can transform a person from the inside out, you need to know how deep this wound really went. I met Daniel Wright when I was 14 years old. We were both freshmen at Riverside High School in a small town outside of Boston. I was the quiet kid who sat in the back of the computer lab during lunch, teaching myself to code on the school's outdated machines. My parents were immigrants from Taiwan who ran a small dry cleaning business. We didn't have much money, but my father always said that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from you. I believed him. For most of my life, I believed that. Daniel transferred to our school in October of that year. His family had just moved from Connecticut after his father's investment firm opened a new office in Boston. He was everything I wasn't: confident, athletic, and naturally charming. The kind of kid who could walk into any room and make friends within minutes. I remember thinking that someone like him would never even notice someone like me. But Daniel did notice me. On his third day at school, he wandered into the computer lab during lunch and found me debugging a simple game I had programmed. He pulled up a chair next to me and watched in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then he said something I'll never forget. "That's incredible. You made this yourself?" No one had ever called anything I made incredible before. I nodded, too surprised to speak. "Teach me," he said. "I want to learn how to do this." That was the beginning of our friendship. Every day after that, Daniel would meet me in the computer lab, and I would teach him the basics of programming. He wasn't a natural at it like I was, but he was genuinely interested. More importantly, he introduced me to a world I had never known. He invited me to his house, which was the biggest home I had ever been inside. He took me to parties where I would have otherwise been invisible. He defended me when other kids made fun of my clothes or my accent or my inability to afford the things they took for granted. Daniel Wright became my best friend, my protector, and eventually my brother in every way, except blood. We went to different colleges. I got into MIT on a full scholarship. Daniel went to Wharton, following in his father's footsteps toward a business degree, but we stayed close. We called each other every week, visited during breaks, and talked constantly about our future. Daniel always said that I was the smartest person he knew, and that one day we were going to build something amazing together. I believed him. I trusted him with my dreams, my insecurities, my entire vision of what my life could become. That trust was the foundation of everything that came after. After graduation, I spent 4 years working as a software developer for a large tech company in San Francisco. The work was stable but unfulfilling. I was building someone else's dream, solving problems that didn't inspire me, and watching less talented people get promoted because they were better at office politics than I was. Every night, I would go home to my small apartment and work on my own projects. My real passion, the idea for Nexus Sync, came to me during a particularly frustrating week at work. Our team was struggling to coordinate across 3 different continents, and every existing collaboration platform felt clunky, outdated, and disconnected from how people actually worked. I started sketching out concepts for something different. A platform that would use artificial intelligence to anticipate what teams needed, automate the mundane tasks that consumed hours of every workday, and create seamless connections between remote workers that felt as natural as sitting in the same room. I spent 18 months building the prototype in my spare time. I poured every ounce of knowledge I had accumulated since that computer lab in high school into this project. By the time I had something functional, I knew it was special. The technology was years ahead of anything on the market. The potential was enormous. But I also knew that I couldn't do this alone. I was a developer, not a businessman. I understood code, not investors and market strategies and corporate partnerships. I needed someone I could trust to handle the side of the business I knew nothing about. I called Daniel. He had spent the years since college climbing the ladder at various investment firms, learning the language of money and power that I had never bothered to understand. When I showed him the prototype for Nexus Sync, his reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. His eyes went wide. He asked 100 questions, and when I finished explaining everything, he sat back in his chair and shook his head slowly. "Marcus," he said, "this is going to change everything. This is the one. I can feel it. We agreed to become partners. 50-50 ownership. I would handle all technology development, product design, and engineering. Daniel would handle business strategy, investor relations, and operations. We drew up the partnership agreement ourselves, two friends who trusted each other too much to involve lawyers in what we considered a sacred bond. That was my first mistake, but it wouldn't be my last. We officially launched Nexus Sync Technologies in September of 2019. I had quit my job and moved back to Boston to be closer to Daniel. We rented a small office space in Cambridge, just the two of us working 16-hour days to turn my prototype into a fully functional platform. Those early months were some of the happiest of my life. I remember staying up until 3 in the morning coding while Daniel paced behind me, bouncing ideas off the walls and planning our future as if it were already guaranteed. When we close our first major funding round, he would say, "We're going to rent the top floor of a building downtown. We're going to hire 50 engineers. We're going to be on the cover of every tech magazine in the country." I didn't care about covers or buildings or 50 engineers. I just wanted to see my creation come to life. But Daniel's enthusiasm was infectious. He made me believe that we were building something that would matter. By early 2020, the prototype had evolved into a full platform. We had a handful of beta users, mostly small companies that Daniel had convinced to try our product. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Users were amazed by how intuitive the interface was, how accurately the AI predicted their needs, and how much time they saved every single day. We were ready to seek serious investment. Daniel handled all of the investor meetings. He said it made more sense for him to be the public face of the company, since he understood the language investors spoke. I was uncomfortable in those settings anyway. I preferred to stay in the office, refining the code, adding new features, and responding to user feedback. I trusted Daniel to represent us fairly. The first meeting was with a mid-sized venture capital firm called Thornton Partners. Daniel came back to the office practically glowing. He said they were impressed, that they had asked dozens of questions about the technology, and that they wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting. "They want to see a full demo," Daniel said, "and they want to know more about the founding story, how we came up with the idea, what makes us different, all of that." I prepared a detailed presentation explaining every aspect of Nexus Sync's technology. I created documentation showing the evolution of the platform from my original sketches to the current version. I assumed Daniel would share all of this with the investors, presenting me as the technical founder and himself as the business founder, equal partners with complementary skills. But Daniel never took me to that meeting. He said it would be better for him to handle it alone. Investors preferred dealing with a single point of contact, he explained. It would be less confusing for everyone if he managed the relationship and then reported back to me. I didn't question him. Why would I? This was Daniel, my best friend, the person who had believed in me when no one else did, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. 3 weeks later, Daniel called me with incredible news. Thornton Partners had agreed to invest $2 million in Nexus Sync Technologies. We were officially funded. I remember crying when I hung up the phone. Years of work, years of dreaming, and it was finally happening. My father's words echoed in my mind. Knowledge was the one thing no one could take from me. And I had used that knowledge to build something real, but that night, something small happened that I almost dismissed. Something that should have been a warning sign, but that I was too happy to recognize. Daniel sent me the investment term sheet to review. It was full of legal language I didn't fully understand, but one detail caught my attention. Under the section listing company founders, only one name appeared. Daniel Wright, sole founder and chief executive officer. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. "I saw the term sheet," I said. There's a mistake. It only lists you as the founder. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that lasted just a second too long. That's just how they formatted it, Daniel said. It's standard for investor documents to list the CEO as the primary founder. Your equity stake is still protected. Nothing has changed about our partnership. But shouldn't my name be on there somewhere? As co-founder or CTO or something? Marcus, these are just formalities. The important thing is that we got the money. We can worry about titles later. Right now, we need to focus on building the company. I wanted to believe him, and so I did. I told myself that Daniel knew this world better than I did. I told myself that we were still partners, still equals, still building this dream together. I pushed my concerns aside and got back to work. That was my second mistake. Over the next year, Nexus Sync grew rapidly. The funding allowed us to hire a small team of developers, rent a proper office, and expand our marketing efforts. Our user base multiplied. Revenue started coming in. Tech publications began writing articles about us, calling Nexus Sync one of the most innovative collaboration platforms on the market. But something else was happening too. Something I didn't notice at first because I was so focused on the technology. Daniel was becoming the face of the company in every possible way. When journalists called for interviews, Daniel took every single one. When industry conferences invited us to speak, Daniel went alone. When potential clients wanted to meet the team behind the platform, Daniel insisted on handling those relationships personally. At first, I didn't mind. Public relations had never been my strength. I was happy to let Daniel handle that side of things while I focused on what I did best. But slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't perceive the shift, Daniel's language about Nexus Sync began to change. In early interviews, he would say, "we," when talking about the company's vision. We developed this technology. We saw a gap in the market. We wanted to revolutionize remote collaboration. But by the end of that first year, the we had quietly become I. I developed a proprietary AI system that no one else has. I recognized that existing platforms were failing their users. I built Nexus Sync from the ground up to solve these problems. The first time I read one of these interviews, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like confusion. Maybe the journalist had misquoted him. Maybe Daniel had simply misspoken. I brought it up casually one afternoon when we were alone in the office. "Hey, I read that TechCrunch article," I said. "The interviewer made it sound like you built the whole platform yourself." Daniel didn't look up from his laptop. "Yeah, journalists always simplify things. You know how it is. But you didn't correct them. You could have mentioned that I'm the technical founder, that I designed the entire system." "Marcus." He finally looked at me and his expression was patient, almost condescending. "You have to understand how these things work. Investors and journalists want a clean narrative. They want one visionary leader, not two founders with different roles. It's just easier this way. It doesn't change anything about our partnership. It changes the truth. The truth is complicated. Stories are simple. We're telling a story right now, Marcus, and that story is what's going to make us successful." I should have pushed back harder. I should have demanded that he set the record straight. But I looked at our growing company, our expanding team, our rising revenue, and I convinced myself that Daniel was right. The details didn't matter as much as the results. That was my third mistake. The second round of funding began in the summer of 2021. We were seeking $15 million to expand into international markets and triple our engineering team. Daniel said he had lined up meetings with some of the biggest venture capital firms on the East Coast. This time, I insisted on being involved. I had spent 2 years building this company's technology, and I wanted investors to see me, to understand my role, to know that Nexus Sync's innovation came from my mind and my work. Daniel agreed, though I noticed a slight hesitation in his voice. He said he would send me the meeting schedules and presentation materials so I could prepare. The first meeting was with a firm called Hartwell Capital, run by a legendary investor named Richard Harmon. I had read about him in business magazines. He had an almost supernatural ability to identify game-changing technology before anyone else. His endorsement alone would be worth millions in credibility. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office early to review the presentation deck one final time. My heart was pounding with anticipation. This was my chance to show the world who I really was. But when I opened my email, I found a message from Daniel sent at 2 in the morning. Meeting with Hartwell pushed to next week. False alarm on the timing. I'll send new details soon. I was disappointed but not suspicious. Scheduling changes happened all the time. I spent the day working on new features for the platform, assuming I would hear from Daniel later with updated plans. 2 days passed, then 3. Daniel was busy, always busy, responding to my messages with brief texts saying he was in meetings or dealing with investor logistics. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then my sister Sophie called. Sophie was 3 years younger than me, a corporate lawyer at a major firm in New York. She was sharp, skeptical, and fiercely protective of her older brother. She had never fully trusted Daniel, though she had never said so directly. She thought he talked too much and listened too little. She thought his ambition had a sharp edge to it. "Marcus," she said when I answered, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course, what is it?" "I had lunch with a colleague today. She works in venture capital on the side, sits on a few boards. She mentioned that Richard Harmon is seriously considering investing in a collaboration platform based in Boston. A company called Nexus Sync." "That's us," I said, confused. "We're scheduled to meet with him next week." "Well, we were supposed to meet this week, but it got pushed." "Marcus." Sophie's voice tightened. "My colleague was at a dinner 3 nights ago. A dinner where Richard Harmon met with Daniel Wright, where Daniel gave a full presentation about Nexus Sync." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. "That's not possible. Daniel said the meeting was postponed." "The meeting happened, Marcus. And from what my colleague described, Daniel presented himself as the sole founder of the company. He didn't mention you at all. He talked about how he conceived the idea, how he built the technology, how he spent years developing the AI system. He told Richard Harmon that Nexus Sync was entirely his creation." I couldn't speak. The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here." My voice came out as a whisper. "There's more." My colleague said the presentation included documentation, patents, design documents, early prototypes. All of them listed Daniel as the sole inventor. She asked if there was a technical co-founder, and Daniel said no. He said he had taught himself to code in college and built everything from scratch. The room was spinning. Every word my sister spoke landed like a physical blow. "That's a lie," I said. "I built everything. Every line of code, every algorithm, every piece of that platform came from me. Daniel can barely write a simple program. I taught him the basics 15 years ago, but he never got past beginner level." "I believe you," Sophie said. "But Marcus, if what my colleague is saying is accurate, Daniel isn't just taking credit for your work. He's erasing you from the company entirely. He's rewriting history so that you never existed." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. My best friend, my partner, my brother in everything but blood, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in my life. He was stealing everything I had ever built, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. The next 48 hours were a blur of confusion and pain. I confronted Daniel the following morning, showing up at the office before anyone else arrived. When he walked in and saw me sitting in the dark, his expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise. Maybe even fear? But it vanished so quickly that I almost thought I had imagined it. "Marcus, you're here early." "I know about the Hartwell meeting." His face remained perfectly composed. "What do you mean?" "The meeting that happened 3 nights ago. The meeting you told me was postponed. The meeting where you told Richard Harmon that you built Nexus Sync entirely by yourself." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. He walked slowly to his desk, set down his bag, and turned to face me. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true? He sighed as if I were a child who couldn't understand adult matters. Marcus, you have to understand the reality of fundraising at this level. These investors are betting millions of dollars on a single person's vision. They don't want to hear about shared leadership or equal partnerships. They want to believe in one genius, one visionary, one leader. So you told them that you're the visionary, that you built everything. I told them what they needed to hear, what we needed them to hear if we want this company to survive. We? I stood up from my chair, my voice rising. There is no we in your story, Daniel. You erased me. You told them I don't exist. I simplified things. You lied. You stole my work and claimed it as your own. His expression hardened. For the first time in 15 years of friendship, I saw something cold behind his eyes. Something that had always been there, I realized, hidden beneath the charm and the smiles and the endless encouragement. I didn't steal anything, he said. This company exists because of me. I brought in the investors. I built the relationships. I convinced people to believe in this vision. You might have written the code, Marcus, but code is worthless without someone who can sell it. Without me, you'd still be sitting in your apartment with a brilliant prototype that no one would ever see. Without me, there would be no prototype. There would be no company. Everything you're selling came from my mind. And everything that allowed it to become real came from mine. We stared at each other across the office, years of friendship crumbling between us. I'm going to tell the investors the truth, I said. I have evidence, documentation, timestamps on every piece of code I've ever written. They'll know you lied. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A subtle relaxation, as if he had been expecting this moment and had already planned for it. Go ahead and try, he said. But I should tell you something first. 3 months ago, I had our legal team restructure the company's intellectual property agreements. Every piece of technology developed under Nexus Sync's name now belongs to the company, and the company's founding documents list me as the sole original contributor. Those documents are fraudulent. They're signed. By you. My blood turned cold. What? Remember all those papers I had you sign during the first funding round? The ones I told you were standard formalities? You trusted me to handle the details. You didn't read them carefully. No one ever reads them carefully. I thought back to those early days. Daniel pushing stacks of papers across the desk. Me, exhausted and naive, signing wherever he pointed, trusting him completely. I would never agree to give up my rights. What you would or wouldn't agree to doesn't matter. What matters is what your signature says. And your signature says that all intellectual property contributions to Nexus Sync belong to the company, that you acknowledge Daniel Wright as the founding inventor of record, and that you waive any claims to original ownership of core technologies developed prior to incorporation. The words hit me like hammer blows. You planned this, I whispered. From the beginning. You planned to steal everything. Daniel picked up his bag and walked toward the door. I didn't steal anything, Marcus. I just took what I was always going to deserve. You had talent, but talent without power is meaningless. You were never going to become anything without me. I gave you the chance to be part of something great, and if you're too weak to accept your role in that, then maybe it's time for you to consider other opportunities. He paused at the door and looked back at me. I'll have HR send over a severance package. Generous considering the circumstances. I suggest you take it and move on, because if you try to fight me on this, you'll lose. I have the documents, the investors, and the story. All you have is a claim that no one will believe. Then he walked out, leaving me alone in the office I had helped build, surrounded by technology I had created with my own hands. I went home that night and didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I barely ate. I barely slept. I just sat in the darkness, replaying every moment of my friendship with Daniel, looking for the warning signs I had missed. They were everywhere, I realized. The way he always positioned himself between me and anyone who mattered. The way he handled all the paperwork, all the meetings, all the external relationships. The way he had slowly, methodically replaced we with I in every public statement until my existence had been completely erased. He had been building toward this from the very beginning. Every moment of friendship, every gesture of support, every word of encouragement had been part of a long game I never knew we were playing. I thought about giving up, taking the severance, walking away, letting Daniel have his victory. What was the point of fighting someone who had outmaneuvered me so completely? But then I remembered my father's words. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. Daniel had taken my company. He had taken my reputation. He had taken my trust and my faith in friendship. But he hadn't taken my knowledge. He couldn't take the truth of what I had built and who I really was. And I realized something else too. Daniel was smart, but he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He had underestimated me. He saw me as a naive technician who would quietly accept his defeat. He didn't consider that the same analytical mind that had built Nexus Sync's technology could be turned toward a very different kind of problem. I wasn't going to fight Daniel Wright with lawyers and documents and investor relationships. He would beat me in that arena every time. I was going to fight him with the truth, and I was going to make sure the whole world saw exactly who he really was. The first thing I did was call Sophie. She listened in silence as I explained everything Daniel had said, every document he claimed to possess, every legal trap he had sprung. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He made a mistake." "What do you mean?" "He told you his entire strategy. He showed you all his cards because he was so confident you couldn't do anything about it." "That's arrogance, Marcus, and arrogance creates blind spots." "He has signed documents. My signature on papers giving away my rights." "I've seen cases like this before. Contracts obtained through fraud, misrepresentation, or manipulation can be voided. If we can prove that he deliberately deceived you about the nature of those documents, that he planned from the beginning to use them against you, then we have a case. How do we prove that? We find evidence of his intent, communications, witnesses, patterns of behavior. People like Daniel don't just betray one person. They leave trails, and those trails eventually lead somewhere. Sophie connected me with a colleague of hers who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Her name was Victoria Chang, and she had a reputation for taking down executives who thought they were untouchable. When I told her my story, she didn't react with skepticism or sympathy. She simply nodded and said, "Let's see what we can find." The investigation began quietly. I couldn't afford to alert Daniel that I was fighting back. As far as he knew, I was a broken man considering his severance offer and preparing to disappear from his life forever. I played that role carefully. I responded to his HR department with questions about the severance terms. I made it seem like I was negotiating, buying time, while Victoria's team dug into Daniel's past. What they found was exactly what Sophie had predicted. Daniel Wright had left a trail. The first discovery came from a former employee of Daniel's previous company, a startup he had worked for before we founded Nexus Sync. This woman, Priya Sharma, had been a developer there. She had watched Daniel take credit for a major product feature that she had designed. When she complained to management, Daniel had convinced them that she was lying, that she was unstable, that she couldn't be trusted. She was fired within a month. Priya had kept records, emails, design documents, Slack messages, evidence that proved Daniel had claimed her work as his own years before he did the same to me. The second discovery was even more damaging. Victoria's team obtained records of Daniel's communications with our company lawyer during the early days of Nexus Sync. These records showed that Daniel had specifically asked how to structure intellectual property agreements in a way that would minimize the legal standing of a technical contributor. He had been planning to cut me out before we even incorporated the company, but the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. One of the investors Daniel had pitched to, a woman named Elizabeth Chen from a smaller venture firm, had rejected his proposal. She had found his story suspicious and had done her own research. She had discovered that much of the technology Daniel claimed to have developed was actually based on open-source contributions, traced back to an account under my name. Elizabeth had kept records of her findings. She had intended to warn other investors about Daniel, but had never followed through. When Victoria contacted her, she was willing to share everything. We were building a case, not just a legal case, but a case for the truth. A comprehensive picture of who Daniel Wright really was and what he had done to me and others. But I knew that legal proceedings alone might not be enough. Daniel had powerful connections. He could afford the best lawyers. He could delay and obstruct for years. And in the meantime, he would continue to profit from my work, continue to lie to investors and the public, continue to live as if he had earned everything he had stolen. I needed to do more than just sue him. I needed to expose him in a way that he couldn't escape. 6 months into my investigation, something unexpected happened. Daniel called me. I hadn't spoken to him since that morning in the office. I had almost forgotten the sound of his voice. But when I saw his name on my phone, all the rage I had been channeling into my investigation came flooding back. I answered anyway. I needed to know what he wanted. Marcus. His voice was warm, friendly, as if nothing had happened between us. It's been too long. How are you doing? What do you want, Daniel? I wanted to check in on you. I know things ended badly between us, and I've been feeling guilty about it. I think we should talk, maybe work something out. Work what out? A way for us to both move forward. Nexus Sync is doing incredibly well. Our Series B is closing next month. $22 million. Richard Harmon is leading the round personally. It's everything we ever dreamed of. Everything we dreamed of. As if I still had any part in that dream. I'm glad for you, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Marcus, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh that day. Maybe there's a way to bring you back into the fold. Not as a founder, of course. That ship has sailed. But as a senior technical advisor. Someone who can help guide the technology from behind the scenes. It would come with equity. Real money. More than you'd make anywhere else. I understood immediately what this was. Daniel had heard something. Maybe a rumor about my investigation. Maybe someone had mentioned that his former partner was asking questions. He was trying to bring me close, to make me compliant, to ensure I wouldn't cause problems during his big funding round. It was also an opportunity. I'd like that, I said. Maybe we could meet and talk about it. Absolutely. How about dinner next week? I know a great place in Cambridge. Sounds perfect. I hung up and immediately called Victoria. He's worried, I said. He wants to meet. He's trying to buy my silence. Good, Victoria said. That means our investigation is making him nervous. It also means he might say something useful. Something we can use. The dinner was scheduled for the following Thursday at an upscale restaurant near Harvard. I spent the days leading up to it preparing. Not just preparing what I would say, but preparing myself emotionally for sitting across from the man who had destroyed my life. Victoria suggested that I wear a recording device. Massachusetts was a two-party consent state, meaning I would need to inform Daniel that he was being recorded for it to be legally admissible. But there was another approach. I could guide the conversation toward topics that would be useful for our case without recording anything. I could get Daniel comfortable, get him talking, and remember everything he said for later. I agreed, but I had another idea too. One that was riskier but potentially more powerful. I reached out to a journalist I had met years earlier, a tech reporter named Sarah Winters, who wrote for a major publication. I had helped her with background information on a story about AI development, and she had always said to call if I ever had something newsworthy. I told Sarah everything. The founding of Nexus Sync, Daniel's betrayal, the fraudulent documents, the pattern of theft throughout his career. I showed her the evidence Victoria had gathered. Sarah listened with the intensity of a reporter who knows she has stumbled onto something significant. This is explosive, she said, but I need more. I need Daniel to confirm some of this himself. or at least react to it in a way that's revealing. What if you could have that? I said. What if there was a way for you to see him respond to these accusations in real time? How would that work? Let me worry about that. Just be ready to move when I tell you. The dinner with Daniel was one of the most difficult performances of my life. I had to sit across from my former best friend, smile at his jokes, pretend that I was considering his offer, and act as if I had forgiven everything he had done. Daniel was at his most charming. He ordered expensive wine. He talked about the old days, about high school and college and all the dreams we had shared. He made self-deprecating jokes about his lack of technical skills. He told me how much he missed having me around, and through it all I smiled and nodded and waited for my opportunity. It came near the end of the meal. Daniel had drunk enough wine to loosen his tongue, and the conversation had drifted toward the investor meetings. The thing about Richard Harmon, Daniel said, is that he's incredibly thorough. He wanted to know everything about how the technology works. I had to study your old documentation for weeks just to be able to answer his questions. I kept my expression neutral. My old documentation? Daniel waved his hand dismissively. You know what I mean. The technical specs you created, the architecture documents, all that stuff I never really understood. I basically had to memorize it to sound credible. But you told him you built it yourself. Daniel laughed. Of course I did. What was I supposed to say? That my partner did all the technical work while I just networked? No one invests in a figurehead, Marcus. They invest in a visionary. And for 30 minutes at a time, I can be the most convincing visionary in the room. And no one has ever questioned it? Ever wondered if maybe you weren't telling the whole truth? He leaned forward, his eyes bright with wine and self-satisfaction. That's the beautiful thing about this industry. Everyone lies. Everyone exaggerates. The people who succeed are just better at it. I learned that a long time ago, probably before I even met you. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing wisdom from a mentor. I have to admit, I said, I'm impressed. I never realized how strategic you were being all those years, how far ahead you were thinking. Daniel preened visibly. That's because you were focused on the technology. That's what you were always good at. Big picture thinking was never your strength, but it's mine. I can see patterns that other people miss. Opportunities, weaknesses. Is that how you saw me? As a weakness? He paused, considering the question. I saw you as an asset, an incredibly valuable asset. But assets need to be managed, Marcus. They need to be directed and controlled. You had talent, but no ambition. No drive to turn that talent into power. Left to yourself, you would have spent your whole life working for other people, building their dreams instead of your own. I gave you purpose. I gave you direction. And yes, I took control of what we built together, but I also made it worth something. Without me, Nexus Sync would just be code on a hard drive somewhere. With me, it's a company worth $50 million. Worth $50 million to you. I got nothing. Daniel shrugged. You got experience. You got to watch how a real company is built. That's more valuable than money, Marcus. You can take what you learned and use it somewhere else. Build something new. I won't stop you. Unless I compete with you, he smiled thinly. Then I would stop you. Make no mistake about that. I have resources now. Legal resources, financial resources, relationships with people who matter. If you tried to undermine what I've built, I would destroy you. Not out of malice, just business. I looked at my former best friend across the table and saw finally the person he had always been. The charm was a tool. The friendship had been a strategy. Every moment of our 15-year relationship had been, for him, an investment in his own eventual success. I smiled back at him. I appreciate the honesty, Daniel. It helps me understand where things really stand. He raised his glass. Too understanding. I raised mine in return, already thinking about what came next. After that dinner, I moved quickly. I called Sarah Winters and told her I was ready. I explained exactly what Daniel had said, how he had admitted to lying to investors, how he had described me as an asset to be managed and controlled, how he had threatened to destroy me if I ever challenged him. Sarah was professional, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. This is enough for me to start making calls. I want to reach out to the investors Daniel mentioned, especially Richard Harmon. I want to see what they say when confronted with what you've told me. Be careful, I said. Daniel has connections everywhere. If he finds out you're investigating before you're ready to publish, he'll find a way to stop you. I've dealt with people like him before. I know how to be discreet. While Sarah worked on the journalism side, Victoria continued building our legal case. We had accumulated enough evidence to file a civil lawsuit alleging fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and theft of intellectual property. But Victoria wanted to wait until Sarah's article was ready. The combination of legal pressure and public exposure would be more devastating than either approach alone. The waiting was the hardest part. Weeks passed. I had no income, having rejected Daniel's insulting severance offer. I was living off savings and my sister's occasional financial support. Every day I woke up wondering if this would be the day everything fell apart, if Daniel would discover what I was doing and find a way to preempt my attack. But Daniel was distracted. The Series B funding round was his entire focus. He was traveling constantly, meeting with investors, giving presentations, building the legend of Daniel Wright, the brilliant founder who had single-handedly revolutionized collaboration technology. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah Winters had done her job masterfully. The piece was thorough, devastating, and impossible to dismiss. She had interviewed Priya Sharma, who described her own experience of having her work stolen by Daniel. She had obtained the communications between Daniel and our company lawyer, proving that he had planned from the beginning to marginalize my role. She had spoken to Elizabeth Chen, the investor who had discovered the truth about Daniel's claims. And she had reached Richard Harmon himself. Richard Harmon's response was the most damaging part of the article. When confronted with the evidence that Daniel had lied about building Nexus Sync's technology, Harmon had gone silent for a long moment. Then he had said on the record, "If what you're telling me is true, then I have been profoundly deceived, and I do not respond kindly to deception." Within hours of the article's publication, the story had gone viral. Tech journalists, industry insiders, and ordinary people on social media were all talking about Daniel Wright and his systematic theft of his partner's work. The words fraud and con artist trended alongside his name. By noon, Hartwell Capital had issued a statement announcing that they were withdrawing from the Nexus Sync funding round, pending a full investigation. By evening, 3 other investors had followed suit. By the end of the week, the $22 million Series B had completely collapsed. Not a single investor was willing to put money into a company whose founder had been exposed as a liar and a thief. But I wasn't finished yet. Victoria filed our lawsuit the Monday after the article appeared. The civil case sought compensation for fraud, restitution of stolen intellectual property, and a court order recognizing me as the legitimate co-founder and co-inventor of Nexus Sync's technology. Daniel's lawyers tried to have the case dismissed, arguing that I had signed documents waiving my rights. But when Victoria presented evidence that those documents had been obtained through deliberate misrepresentation, the judge denied the motion. The case would proceed to trial. Daniel himself went into hiding after the article dropped. He stopped appearing at investor meetings, stopped responding to media inquiries, stopped showing his face in public at all. The board of directors of Nexus Sync, several of whom had been appointed by the now withdrawn investors, called an emergency meeting. They were considering removing Daniel as CEO. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. Calm, measured, professional. "Mr. Chen, my name is Thomas Grant. I'm the lead outside counsel for Nexus Sync Technologies. I'm calling because the board has asked me to explore whether there might be a way to resolve this matter without prolonged litigation." "I'm listening." The board recognizes that Mr. Wright made serious misrepresentations about the company's founding and technology. They're prepared to take corrective action. Mr. Wright has agreed to resign as CEO effective immediately. The board would like to invite you to return to the company as Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, with full recognition of your contributions to the platform. And Daniel? Mr. Wright will retain a small equity stake, but he will have no operational role and no voting rights. He has also agreed to issue a public statement acknowledging your role in founding the company and apologizing for his previous misrepresentations. I thought about it for less than a second. No. Mr. Chen, I think you should consider... I don't want to return to Nexus Inc. I don't want to work alongside board members who enabled Daniel for years. And I don't want an apology that his lawyers drafted for him. I want justice. There was a long pause on the line. What exactly would justice look like to you, Mr. Chen? Daniel Wright destroyed my reputation, stole my work, and tried to erase me from existence. I want him to face real consequences, financial, legal, and personal. I want everyone to know exactly what he did and who he really is. And I want to be made whole for everything I lost. Those are significant demands. Then I'll see you in court. I hung up and felt, for the first time in months, a sense of peace. The trial took place almost a year after Sarah's article was published. Victoria had built an airtight case. We had evidence of Daniel's intent to defraud me. We had testimony from other victims of his behavior. We had expert witnesses who examined the code base and confirmed that the technology was entirely my creation. We had communications proving that Daniel could barely write basic programs, let alone develop sophisticated AI systems. Daniel's defense team tried everything. They argued that I had voluntarily signed away my rights. They claimed that my contributions were minor compared to Daniel's business development work. They suggested that I was a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming. The pattern of deception was too clear. On the final day of testimony, Daniel himself took the stand. His lawyers had advised against it, but he insisted. He still believed that his charm could save him, that he could convince the jury, as he had convinced so many others, that he was the real victim. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Under cross-examination, Victoria dismantled him piece by piece. She confronted him with the emails to the company lawyer. She showed him the documentation proving that the code was mine. She played recordings of former colleagues describing how Daniel had taken credit for other people's work throughout his career. And then she asked the question that ended everything. Mr. Wright, can you explain in technical terms how the artificial intelligence system at the core of Nexus Inc. actually functions? Daniel froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I watched as years of lies caught up with him in real time. Mr. Wright, this is the technology you claim to have invented. Surely you can explain how it works. It's complicated, he stammered. There are many components. Name one component. Explain one algorithm. Describe one aspect of the system that you personally created. Silence. The jury watched. The gallery watched. I watched. Daniel looked at me across the courtroom, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The fear of someone who has built his entire life on lies and is watching those lies collapse around him. I can't, he finally said. I don't know the details. Because you didn't create it, Victoria said. Because Marcus Chen created it, and you stole it from him. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Everyone in that courtroom already knew the truth. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Daniel liable on all counts: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft of intellectual property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They awarded me compensatory damages of $12 million and punitive damages of an additional $5 million. But more important than the money was the public vindication. The verdict was covered by every major news outlet. Headlines called it a victory for inventors and creators everywhere. Daniel Wright's name became synonymous with corporate fraud and startup deception. The money was placed in escrow pending appeal, but Daniel's lawyers told him he had no chance of overturning the verdict. He would have to pay. And with the collapse of Nexus Inc.'s funding and his total loss of reputation in the industry, he had no way to earn it back. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel moved to a small town in New Hampshire after the trial. He couldn't show his face in Boston anymore, couldn't attend industry events, couldn't call in favors from the powerful people who had once celebrated him. His fall was complete. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge that I had imagined during all those months of investigation and preparation. I felt empty and tired and sad. Because the truth was, I had lost something that could never be restored. My belief in friendship, my trust in the people closest to me, my faith that the people who say they love you actually mean it. Daniel Wright had stolen more than my company. He had stolen my innocence, my ability to believe in other people without reservation. In the months after the trial, I tried to move forward. I used part of my settlement to start a new company, building on some of the ideas I had been developing during the years of legal battle. This time, I worked with lawyers from the beginning. I documented everything. I never signed a paper without understanding exactly what it said. I was more careful now, more guarded. Maybe too guarded. Sophie told me that I had become distant, that I didn't let people in the way I used to. She worried that Daniel's betrayal had changed me permanently. She was right to worry. It had changed me. How could it not? But there was one thing Daniel hadn't taken, one thing he could never take: my knowledge, my ability to create, my gift for seeing patterns in code and turning them into solutions that could change people's lives. That was still mine. That would always be mine. And slowly, as the years passed, I began to rebuild. Not just my career, but my capacity to trust. It happened one small step at a time. A colleague who followed through on a promise. A friend who showed up when they said they would. A relationship where the person actually meant the words they spoke. I learned that betrayal is not the end of the story. It feels like the end when you're in the middle of it. It feels like the final chapter, the last word, the definitive statement about who you are and what you deserve. But it isn't. Betrayal is just a plot twist. What matters is what you do after. Whether you let it define you or whether you write a new chapter that proves you are more than what was done to you. I chose to write a new chapter. My new company is doing well now. We just closed our Series A. The technology is different from Nexus Sync, but the principles are the same. Build something useful, solve real problems, treat people with respect. This time, I'm working with partners I trust. People who have proven themselves over years, not just months. People who understand that a company is only as strong as the integrity of the people who build it. I still think about Daniel sometimes, not often, but sometimes. I wonder if he regrets what he did, if he lies awake at night thinking about the friendship he destroyed and the person he became. If he understands now that the shortcuts he took led him to nowhere. I hope he does. I hope he learned something from what happened. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want to believe that people can change. That betrayal doesn't have to be the end of someone's story either. That there's always a possibility of redemption, even for those who have done terrible things. But that's his story to write, not mine. Mine is here, in this new company, in these new relationships, in this life I've built from the wreckage of what was taken from me. My father was right all those years ago. Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. But I would add something to that wisdom now. Something I learned through pain and loss and the long, difficult process of putting myself back together. Truth is also something no one can take from you. Not forever. Not if you're willing to fight for it. Daniel Wright tried to steal my truth. He tried to rewrite history so that I never existed. He tried to build his empire on a foundation of lies and deception. And for a while it worked. For a while everyone believed him. But lies have an expiration date. They always do. The truth is patient. It waits. And eventually it finds its way to the surface. I'm grateful for that now. Grateful that I didn't give up. Grateful that I had people like Sophie and Victoria who believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. Grateful that justice, imperfect as it is, eventually arrived. If you're listening to this story because someone you trusted has betrayed you, Because someone close to you has become your enemy. Because you're sitting in the wreckage of a life that was stolen from you, I want you to know something. It's not over. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you do next. Fight back. Not with hatred, but with truth. Document everything. Find allies. Build your case. And never, ever let someone else tell your story for you, because the ending isn't written yet, and the person holding the pen is still you. That's what Daniel Wright never understood. He thought he could control my narrative. He thought his version of events would become permanent reality. He thought that stealing my work meant stealing my future. He was wrong. I wrote my own ending. And standing in that courtroom, watching everything he had stolen crumble around him, I finally understood what victory really meant.